Okay. Well, good evening and welcome to our presentation tonight. I'm Mark Pinto, the Adult Services Director at Phoenixville Public Library. And welcome to our latest presentation in our series, Community Gardening Around the Village. And we'd like to thank first all our co-sponsors for this series, which include Penn State Extension, Phoenixville Communities That Care, the Phoenixville Recreation Department, Camp Hill, Kimberton Hills, Phoenixville Hospital, Phoenixville Area Transition Living Landscapes, Phoenixville Area Positive Alternatives, and Steel Town Village. Our presentation tonight is entitled Backyard Medicine Making, Meals and Medicines from the Landscape, and we're pleased to have with us Charlene Briggs. Charlene is an environmental scientist and educator. She teaches sustainable community design at Temple University and facilitates the development of outdoor classrooms through Earth Visions Consulting. She also runs a therapy practice, Botanical Energetics, where she works with flower essences to help people through anxiety, depression, and trauma. Charlene has been studying herbalism for 3 decades and has a certificate in herbal foraging from the Chestnut School of Herbal Medicine. Charlene is launching an initiative, PXV Community, spelled T-E-A, with Phoenixville Area Transition Living Landscapes Work Group. The signature project is establishing a community medical herb garden with traditional and wild plants from which herbal tea bags will be made for the underserved populations in the Phoenixville area. We are recording, as I mentioned tonight. Our video will be posted later on the Phoenixville Public Library YouTube channel. We ask that you type any questions for the presenter in the chat, and she will address all the questions at the end of her presentation. So with that, we'd like to welcome Charlene Briggs. Charlene.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Mark, for that introduction. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here and part of your series. And welcome everyone to Meals and Medicines from the Landscape. I hope that you have some of these plants in your landscape. If not, I hope you will eventually. I'm going to highlight about 6 plants tonight and talk about the food and medicine values of them. I'm also going to use this launch pad of a Zoom for future Zooms on individual plants. Each of the plants that I'm going to talk about tonight and many of the others that I will be talking about in my Zooms could take the good part of an hour to go into the identification, the habitat, the growth structures and so forth, growth patterns. So I will be doing that more. So there's more to come. This is a launch. And I'm also going to talk a bit about, though I have a certificate in ethical foraging, I'm going to talk about the ethics of foraging because we need to start from a foundation of landscape ethics before we go into these topics of using the plants. So with that, I'm going to share some of the plants. Oops. These are some of the plants that I'll be talking about. You can take a look at these and see if you can identify any of them. Give you a second. So left to right, we have plantain. We have burdock, violet. The middle row is nettles, dandelion, elderberry, garlic mustard. The bottom row is chickweed, lamb's quarters, and mullein. So all of these are food and medicine for us and also for the other organisms with whom we share the planet. So Meals and Medicines from the Landscape is really about harvesting plants that emerge both in your flower beds and in your yard space for free. They're not plants that you would typically go to the nursery, landscape nursery to buy, but these plants will find you. So if you have access to a living landscape without pesticides, you have a feast of free food at your fingertips. You have violet syrup, you have dandelion leaf salad, you have burdock root stir fry, plantain spit poultice for a bee sting, lamb's quarters as a spinach substitute, yarrow to stop bleeding from a cut, dandelion root tincture, spring tonic, and mullein leaf that tones the lungs, mullein leaf tea. So all of these plants are growing from the landscape for free. So foraging is a form of herbalism, which is an art and it's a science. And before you launch into herb foraging, you need to get a field guide. I have references at the end of this talk, pictures of books that for the southeastern PA region particularly, but also East Coast. It's still appropriate for East Coast, Mid-Atlantic region mostly. But a lot of these plants that I'm going to talk about are all over the United States. And in fact, they're in Eastern Europe as well, or Western Europe. So field guide is important and lots of experience, hands-on experience. Many of these plants have lookalikes, so it's important to know what they are. So before you forage, if you don't know what the plant is, you don't want to pick it. You don't want to ever take a chance on picking something if you're not absolutely certain. You need to learn a little bit of botany for the ID, know what poisonous plants are in your landscape that might look like ones that you want. Make sure the area is free of chemicals. Check with United Plant Savers to make sure that these plants are not rare and endangered. United Plant Savers highlights plants that are over harvested and over wildcrafted. They have a to watch list and at risk list. So you don't want to be harvesting these plants. There's analogs to these plants that you can use instead. And you want to record the date and the location of anything that you pick. Keeping in mind all the while that it's very easy to get poisoned by a plant. Starting off with the bad news, you every conference I go to, we hear of somebody that ate the wrong plant, and if you make an assumption, it could be your last decision you make. So you want to make sure that you know what you're picking. Some of the plants have lookalikes that can actually kill you. So it's important to know what part of the plant to pick, when to pick it, how to pick it, and how to harvest it, and make sure that you don't have any shadow of a doubt about the plant's ID. So that's why you can attend some of the Zooms. And the Zooms, I will talk about plant ID, lookalikes, how to identify the plant in question. So, but that being said, it's not rocket science, and it's a lot of fun. And as long as you're attentive to detail, you're fine. And you can make yourself a nice meal and medicine from the plants that are right outside of your door in your yards. So it's important to know your landscape and the landscape surrounding your landscape before you start harvesting or foraging. And we're looking for living landscapes that are not polluted with pesticides. So I want to talk for a minute about the relationship with the landscape. Okay, so for about 90% of the time that humans have been Homo sapiens sapiens, we've been foraging. We've been hunters and gatherers, and that required us to have an intimate relationship with the landscape. Many of these plants that I'm going to talk about, many of the plants that we forage have co-evolved with humans. There was a Neanderthal man excavated in northern Spain. He was dated at living 50,000 years ago, and they found some yarrow in his teeth. And I have, this is, you can see it. This is yarrow. It's dried, obviously. You can see that. Hopefully you can see it's yarrow. In any case, the leaves and the flowers are medicinal. So why would this Neanderthal have yarrow in his teeth? Yarrow is a bitter, it's a digestive aid, it's a diaphoretic, it helps to bring a fever out and burst a fever. It's also a styptic. It will stop bleeding. So it's likely that this man was making a spit poultice. You put the yarrow leaves in your mouth, you chew them up, and you spit them out, and you put it on the wound, and it stops the bleeding. Yarrow is a very important plant to have in your yard if you have little people running around. You can also powder the leaves and put it in a little tin and take it with you when you go on your excursions in the woods. So humans have had a long-standing relationship with the plant kingdom for food and medicine. Lamb's quarters is another plant. One of its relatives, another species in the Chenopodium genus, was cultivated 3,500 years ago by the First Nations. So that's 1,500 years before corn was cultivated. So we have long-standing relationships with many, many of these plants. And so up until World War II, we had landscapes that looked like this. A lot of our agriculture was local. We hadn't launched into the monocultures yet. And this is a living landscape. This is a landscape where there's room for everyone in it. So meals and medicines from the landscape are also meals and medicines for everyone in the landscape. There's room for birds, bees, butterflies, wildlife in this landscape. It's a landscape of reverence, of respect, of regard, and what Robin Wall Kimmerer calls reciprocity. It's giving back. So foraging is an ethical way of relationship and relating with the landscape. It's a way of giving back as much as we take. And sometimes that giving back is just letting it be, letting the plants be. So. After World War II, we started moving into the monocultures, where we were using intensive agriculture, pesticides and fertilizers. And these chemicals have now made their way into our landscapes. So I want to focus on this landscape for a moment, because it's the antithesis of a foraging landscape. What is the role of this landscape in an ecosystem? I think we're aware that, when water falls onto this landscape, the grass forms a mat. So the water runs off of this landscape. It doesn't infiltrate into the soil. And that water running off captures the phosphates, nutrients, mostly phosphates that are root bound, and the oils and chemicals as it runs over the land and pollutes the aquifer, the aquatic systems, including the aquifers that leaches down into the nitrates will leach down into the aquifers. But what we're not commonly aware of is that as that runoff runs over the land, it warms up. And our aquatic life, all of our aquatic life requires cool water. The little dragonflies, the little fluorescent, little beautiful dragonflies with the transparent wings that fly around, they're so pretty. They spend up to 5 years in the water as macroinvertebrates, like terrorizing all of the macroinvertebrate world. They're like monsters, and they live there. They eat all the mayflies and the stoneflies and the caddisfly larvae. But all of these larvae are fish food, but they can't survive the warm water. So anytime I'm out walking around, and when you're walking in the woods or you're near a stream, go pick up a rock and see if you can see little bugs under there. There should be bugs, macroinvertebrates swarming around under the rocks, but by and large, they're not there. We're warming up our aquifers and our surface waters with the way we treat our landscape. So warm water holds less oxygen. Warm water evaporates more readily. So we're not just changing the aquatic life, we're changing the microclimates with these landscapes. Conversely, these plants that we're talking about foraging, they have taproots, they have lateral roots, they have rhizomes. They make room in the soil for the water to infiltrate and flow through the soil, filtered, and then cooled enters the aquatic system. So we're talking about preserving the integrity of the ecosystem when we're talking about foraging as well. This landscape is also supported by inorganic fertilizers. And I'm a soil scientist. I spent more time than I'd like to remember in the lab studying soil physics and soil chemistry. Soil biology was not on the radar at that point in time, but we know that soil microbes are the foundation for life on the planet. Inorganic fertilizers kill the microbial fraction of the soil. That there's a world, there's a universe underneath the soil that we're just beginning to learn about. That's integral part of of the ecosystem of the earth. Once you kill those microbes, this soil becomes chemically dependent on those inputs. The next step is the pesticides. The most prevalent pesticides are glyphosate and 2,4-D. 2,4-D is 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid. It's the second major ingredient in Agent Orange, which is what we use to defoliate Vietnam. 2,4-D makes a plant grow itself to death. So, and that's what cancer is. And it's been proven in the lab, 2,4-D is carcinogenic, it's hepatotoxic, it's a neurotoxin, and it's an endocrine disruptor. So what we're doing is we're taking these toxic chemicals and putting them on the lawn and expecting that they can distinguish between a dandelion and a dog and a human, and they cannot. So it's important when you're harvesting your plants, that you're not getting chemical drift from a neighboring property, because you don't want that on the plants that you're picking. We have approximately 50 million acres of lawn in this country now. that are being saturated with these pesticides and these inorganic fertilizers. We have 88 million households spending about $9 billion saturating their soil with this. So it may be time for a shift in awareness and consciousness about it. It also, this landscape speaks to who the others are and who are the others that are regarded or not. A chickadee, a clutch of chickadees requires 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to fledge. Without plants for the caterpillars to eat, we don't have adult birds. So we want to plant berry bushes for the adult birds. We want to plant nectar plants for the butterflies, but we need to plant plants that are host plants for insect herbivores so that they can eat them and become food for the young, the birds. And besides adding to the toxic load of the planet, the last thing I want to mention about lawns is that there's a lot of talk now about the drawdown. Paul Hawken, if you Google Paul Hawken, he has a book out because it's called The Drawdown. You know, approximately 1,000 billion tons of carbon are circulating in the atmosphere now. They've been sent up there since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And that carbon is going to stay there circulating, causing untold suffering for our children and children's children and on and on, even if we stop burning fossil fuels tomorrow. There's great possibilities now in drawing of this carbon out of the atmosphere with plants. About 40% of the carbon that gets taken up in photosynthesis gets put back in the soil where it belongs. So the more broadleaf plants we have, the more plants we have, the more we can contribute. And I know it seems like just a little smidge of an impact, 1 yard at a time, but one of my students at the university said, well, there's billions of us. And if everybody does something toward this change, then we can have we can make a collective difference. And I believe that's true. I also believe that we have to make change in that interface. I live in a planned community. I have a little wildlife habitat in my yard, and I'm surrounded, this is where all the birds, bees, butterflies, fox, snakes, deer, bunny rabbits come in, and they live here, groundhogs. I have a garden, and the bunny rabbits don't eat my lettuce because I have enough in my landscape for them to eat. And they like it. My neighbors aren't as impressed. Their yards are all pretty much like golf course yards. My dandelion seeds blow into their landscape. So, but I think it's important to be that change that you want to see, regardless of the opposition. Shortly after I moved here, one of my neighbors came over just to tell me that people don't call you Charlene anymore. They call you that damn tree hugger, and then to punctuate it, they said that they don't like, nobody likes that little picket fence that you have around your garden because it's not white. And I think when we're in that interface, when we're doing, my yard's neat, my gardens, I have medicinal herb gardens, they're neatly trimmed, I mow, it's not like a wild, crazy place, but when we can live in a place where it's not a forageable community and we're foraging, we provide a contrast. And yeah, there will be opposition, but I think it's important to keep in mind that any great change must expect opposition because it shakes the very foundation of privilege. And those were the words of Lucretia Mott. This is a landscape. This landscape, the language of this landscape is the language of privilege. It's the privilege to exterminate and extirpate others without regard for their welfare. So I think it's important that we look at our landscapes. Is it a landscape of empathy? Is it a landscape of courage? Or is it a landscape of conformity and conquest? And the other point I want to mention is that these plants are going to survive our efforts. They've been on land for 450 million years, adapting. They've got lots of tricks up their leaves. They're burying their seeds. They're waiting for fire. They will wait until we're not pestering them anymore. But I think the ethical point here is, if business as usual, just this lawn, means that nobody else is our business but us, then Mother Nature will go about her business without us in the long run. Elder Leopold tells us about how instincts prompt us to compete within the community, whereas ethics prompt us to cooperate. So Is our landscape one of cooperation or is it one of competition? And one more note on our landscaping here, and that is on the note of human suffering. We have food deserts in every nook and cranny in the United States. These are places where people do not have access to fresh food. That dilemma has now been compounded by the pandemic. But nature does not discriminate. These plants that are food and medicine are growing everywhere where people need them. And many of these forage plants have far more nutrition than anything that you're going to buy in a grocery store, especially if it's grown inorganically. So our towns and cities need to think about speaking another language. Perhaps it would behoove us to teach people who are underserved populations how to forage, how to find plants that are growing in their vicinity, or maybe we can plant them so that they have access to food. A forageable landscape means paying it forward. It means it's a statement of solidarity. And in the spirit of that solidarity, those of you who aren't from this area, Phoenixville is about an hour or so northwest of Philadelphia. We have a Phoenixville area transition and a living landscapes work group as part of that, where, as Mark said, we've started a medicinal herb garden, a community medicinal herb garden. Last fall, we harvested tulsi from the garden. We dried it, and now we're making tea bags. And those tea bags will be distributed to the shelters and then to the underserved populations, the immigrants, the immigrant populations, the homeless. Going forward, we'll be harvesting some of the forageable plants that are growing not just in those garden beds, but in the landscape around them, making teas from them, and also teaching people how to identify these plants. So these are forage plants involving the population in identifying these nourishing plants for their own sustenance. I wanted to share this. Maybe some of you know our First Lady's inauguration coat, evening coat, had flowers, embroidered flowers from every state and territory in it. And on the inside was embroidered the saying, tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn. And that's a Ben Franklin quote. Paying it forward means involving those who need help and empowering them to help themselves. And this is another role that we can serve in a living landscape, in a forageable landscape. So our land ethic is spoken in the language of the landscape, in our homes and in our communities. And I think it behooves us to ask ourselves, what is the language of our landscape? So foraging for food and medicine is a gateway. It's a gateway to the heart. It's a child scanning the yard for violets to pick for her mother, to decorate a cake or decorate a salad. It's picking your dinner outside your door. It's blowing those withered dandelion blooms and making a wish. It's soothing a tummy or a toothache or a sore throat or a cough with your yard. And I wonder how many children are still blowing dandelions from the blooms. I have a bottle of dandelion wine that I saved that was made, my family made in 1968. And I still remember collecting all the dandelion blooms for that wine with all the neighborhood kids in the town where I grew up. And making that dandelion wine was a community event. The bottle is a memory of a time when the landscape was safe and beautiful and a place to convene and celebrate life. It was a time before we waged this major war on weeds. So when we think about weeds, we think about this definition from Ralph Waldo Emerson. A lot of people use this. So what is a weed? A plant whose virtues have not yet been discovered. That was a quote from his Fortune of the Republic speech. I won't go into it, but the point I'm making is if our ancestors had not known the value of the weeds, especially the ones we're talking about, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about them. Plant medicine is traditional medicine. My definition is a weed is a plant whose virtues have long since been forgotten. And this initiative is a hope that we will reawaken our relationship with these plants that can serve us and everyone. including the ecosystem. So there's a lot of people who've been keeping these traditions alive. Over the years, 80% of the world still uses plant medicine as its major mode of healing. I am a concoctress. I was raised grazing the landscape. I've spent my whole adult life conjuring and studying with master herbalists. So there are rules that we follow when we're harvesting. And the rules are the tenets. Some of these are the tenets of what Robin Wall Kimmerer calls the honorable harvest. And it's worth mentioning here. Ask permission first and abide by the answer. Only take what you need. Minimize harm to the plant community. Leave the grandmother. Take no more than a third of her offspring. Take only that which is given freely. Only what you need and use what you take. Share it. Make an offering. A prayer of thanks suffices, and care for the landscape. Live the land ethic of reciprocity, which is relationship rooted in respect, regard, and reverence for the land, where the land is not that piece of ground that you are borrowing from the future, but a circuit of energy that follows and flows through all of the beings who share it. So our food and medicine, they don't run out as long as we live this land ethic of reciprocity and where we give as much as we take. Where giving means letting them be, letting them be. So some of these medicinal preparations that I'm going to talk about in the Zooms, I'll talk about some of them tonight. These are ways of being in relationship with the plants. So I'll start from left to right. We can make teas or infusions from mostly the aerial parts of the plants that's above ground. The tincture is what we make from dried or fresh parts of the plant that are usually the solvent is alcohol. And you can buy these tinctures in your healthy food stores already made. The advantage of a tincture is you can take it with you. If you're traveling somewhere, you won't generally be able to make a tea. So you can take these with you. A decoction is made from the roots, the bark, or the berries. The harder part, you want to boil it. I make an antiviral respiratory tonic tea that I made for the pandemic. It's a combination of a decoction and an infusion. There's infused oils. You soak the plant in oil, like olive oil. And from the oil, you add beeswax, and then you get a salve. Syrup, I make elderberry syrup. I drink some elderberry syrup a little bit every day to boost my immune system. There's herbal vinegars. Vinegar will extract a lot of minerals, like from the dandelion in particular. There's essential oils, which are highly concentrated oils from the plants. And then there's the flower essences. These are what I use in my flower essence therapy practice to help people with anxiety, depression, and trauma. The essences are energetic formulas. That's another topic. So how can we be in relationship with all these weeds? How do they help us? So I'd like to take a look at some of the preparations. We'll do that in great detail in the Zooms. I'll talk about some of those preparations today. So I'd like to go into launching into the plants. Excuse me. We're doing on time. Okay. So I'll leave some time for questions at the end, but I'm going to zoom through 6 plants. I'm not going to go into every single bit of detail with the plants. That's, like I said, for the Zooms. Following this Zoom, there'll be about 45 minutes to an hour, but it'll be details about how to identify the plants and lookalikes. But today I want to talk about some of the ways that we can be in relationship with these plants and make some food and medicine from them and how they serve us. So this is the dandelion. And I know it's a common plant for most of us on this Zoom, but I did a workshop or lecture down at main campus at Temple several years ago when I was working downtown. And it was a weed walk, which I couldn't walk because there weren't any weeds. So I brought weeds from my yard and I put 10 weeds in a baggies and passed them around about 100 people, faculty and students in the workshop. And I asked them to identify the plants. So there were 2 dandelions, one was in bloom, one was not. I asked them to identify the plants. Only the dandelion was identified. But more significantly, out of 100 people, only 10 people could identify a dandelion. So those of us on this Zoom might think, well, sure, we know dandelions, but by and large, if that's any representation of the general population, Dandelions are not as well known as we might think, but they are one of the most nutritious plants in the landscape. I grew up eating dandelion salad every night in the summer. Dandelion leaves are very high in vitamins and minerals. You can eat the leaves. The leaves medicinally are good for the kidneys. They will help strengthen the kidneys. I'm not going to go into the habitat. The leaves are a rich source of vitamins and minerals like potassium, iron, calcium. They have 7,000 units of vitamin A per ounce more than spinach. B complex. They're bitters. They help you digest your food. You can make a spring tonic out of them for digestion. The leaves can be diuretic. So if you are taking diuretics, you want to be careful not to eat a ton of dandelion leaves. But you want to harvest them before they flower generally, but I harvest them all through the season and they're fine. This is my recipe. All of these, the whole Zoom is going to be recorded, so you can get these recipes when you log back into the recording. So this is my recipe for dandelion chickweed corn cakes. It's pretty easy and they're pretty tasty. You can make them as sweet as you want to, but they're like little crepes or little pancakes. And you don't eat the, if you're going to eat the dandelion bloom, you can put that in your salad, but you have to pull the calyx off. You just want the little tiny yellow petals. You don't want the green part underneath it. You don't need that. Okay, so there's different preparations that you can buy. The dandelion root tincture or a decoction will help with your liver. It'll help detox your liver. Again, the leaves are more aligned with your kidneys. The roots are more aligned with your liver. You want to harvest the roots in early spring or in late fall. You can chop them up. You can put them in a saute, but they are a liver tonic. And it helps if you've got poor fat digestion, skin issues. So the roots also are high in inulin. They're higher in inulin, and inulin is a prebiotic, so it feeds the probiotics. So if you roast the dandelion root, you'll kill the inulin, or it will deactivate it. It's not alive. But if you want inulin, you want to harvest the roots in the fall. It's much higher. It's like twice as high in the fall as it is in the spring. Okay. Chickweed is a lovely little plant, and it comes up in the spring, and it's you can put it in your salad instead of lettuce, and it looks like the speedwell. Speedwell has little blue leaves, blue flowers, but chickweed has the white flowers. But it's very nutritious. It's very high in vitamin C. It can draw infections down in the skin. It's high in beta carotene. If you have sore eyes, you have red eyes, you can make a tea out of it and put it on your eyes and soak it. There's a reference book at the end of this PowerPoint by John Callis, who's studied plants and their nutritional value, and he's found that chickweed is higher in iron and zinc than almost any other cultivated plant that he studied. And with the pandemic, zinc is a helpful, it's been told, has been a helpful nutrient. A lot of herbalists will combine chickweed with burdock and red clover for skin conditions like eczema. You can make chickweed pesto. You can put it in there with your basil or just use chickweed. I make a chickweed pesto for my students, and it's pretty good. You can harvest this throughout the growing season. The advantage of chickweed is it comes up early in the spring when nothing else is in the garden. You can leave it in your garden and keep harvesting it until your garden plants come up. And then once they come up, you can cut it down and use it as a mulch. And then in the fall, it'll come back again. So it's very symbiotic in your garden. One of the lookalikes is scarlet pimpernel, which is potentially toxic. So you need to know your plant ID. Okay, this is a recipe for chickpea pesto. So you can try that in the spring. It's very yummy. Violets are one of my favorites. I grew up in a yard that had violets all over it. I make violet syrup every every spring. You gather the blooms. It's a soothing. The leaves are very soothing to the respiratory tract. They're demulcents, so they soothe a dry cough. It soothes the irritated lung tissue. It can bring up mucus as a bit of an expectorant. It's good for heartburn. It's also a lymphagogue. It helps move lymph through your system. So the Greeks revered violets. It symbolized Venus, the flower of love. But the flowers are delicious. You can put them in a salad, and they're fun. It's fun to make the syrup. You collect the syrup, and I have that recipe for you here too. This is what the syrup looks like. You put lemon in it, it changes color to red. So this is the recipe for the syrup. Okay, and here's some more resources for you. Nettle, stinging nettle is one of my favorite plants. Obviously, you don't want to walk through it. You have to be careful harvesting it. Stinging nettle has little trichomes on the stem and under the leaves. Excuse me. Pardon me. So you don't want to get stung. It has these little trichomes, they're secondary metabolites to keep people and everything away from the plant. Histamine and acetylcholine and oxalic acid in it, a little serotonin, that is very irritating. So you have to be careful harvesting them. But if you can harvest the first 2 nodes, just the top part in the spring, you can put them in your soup. I make a tea out of it. It's a bit of an antihistamine quality. So I take that for allergies, and I start, as soon as they come up, I start drinking tea in the morning. And but nettle is extremely nutritious. You can make a nettle vinegar, and that you can put in your salads and put in your salad dressings. It's one of the more nutritive plants, extremely high in calcium, fiber, potassium, flavonoids, glucosamine, vitamin K, phosphorus. So it's really a very, very nutritious plant. You can have it I have some in a pot on my patio. So it's you can contain it because it will spread. And in the fall, you can, when it dies back, you can collect the roots, which will contain it even more, and you can make a hair rinse with the roots. So it's very nutritious. It helps rebuild blood and tissue. It's really a very, very nutritious plant. And you can put it, like I said, in your soup. Another soup recipe for you. Lamb's quarters is another nutritious plant. Chenopodium album. It grows all over in our area. You want to make sure you do identify it because it could be related to nightshades. The flowers on the lamb's quarters is what distinguishes it. They're very, very tiny, whereas nightshade flowers are bigger and much more visible. But again, this plant is one where you do want to have a plant ID for it, but it's extremely nutritious. There's been a lot of research on lamb's quarters, and it's much, much, much more nutritious than spinach. And again, this is something I'm looking at in terms of food deserts, people who don't have access to fresh food. This is growing around them. It's growing right outside the door. And there's a lot of recipes that include lamb's quarters. You can substitute lamb's quarters for spinach in any recipe, frittatas and so forth. And it's another name for it is goose foot because it looks like little goose feet. Has little white meal on the back that you can peel that off. It just comes off in your fingers. So that's another identifying characteristic of lamb's quarters. So, and then again, you can put it in your soup. And there's one more recipe for you. Mullein is a really important plant to consider right now because we are in a pandemic that impacts the lungs. That this is a strengthener of the lung tissue, and it helps heal the lungs once they've been once you've been sick. So I make a tea. I dry the leaves and I make a tea. Some people, the little fuzziness irritates them. I haven't found that, but mullein comes up as a rosette. The first year it's a biennial, so it comes up as a rosette. The first year, the second year, it puts out that big stalk that you can like dip in wax and light on fire. A little torch. But the first year plant leaves, you can harvest these and you can dry them and have them as a tea. So, if you have mullein anywhere near you, I would covet this plant. It's extremely, it's a traditional treatment for respiratory problems, chest colds, bronchitis, and asthma. It's a tonic for those who do have asthma. It's not going to stop asthma. It's not going to stop bronchitis. It's not going to stop the cough, but it's going to nourish. It's a bit of it's anti-inflammatory and antiviral. So both the leaves and the flowers are mucilaginous, which is soothing to mucous membranes. And many of Mullein's traditional uses were similar throughout the Old and the New World. So this was brought here. It has been here for generations now. So it's an anti-inflammatory and it's an expectorant. So you want to have this if you have a hot, dry cough. You want to drink some mullein tea. And it also strengthens the lungs. So the roots of the mullein are really good for strengthening the bladder for any kind of incontinence, and that you would make a tincture from the root. It tonifies the bladder. Quaker Rouge is what they call it. So you have some people from meeting here. One of the in the literature they called the leaves, they were called Quaker Rouge because the gals would rub it on their cheeks to get a little color to look pretty. So anyhow, a yellow dye is extracted from the flowers, has been used since Roman times as a hair rinse too. So so these are the flowers, very pretty. The picture here. So you can buy the tea already made. You don't have to collect it, but if it's in your yard, think about it. And I wanted to show this picture, not to end on a sour note, but it's important. So there's 4 pictures here, and they all kind of look alike to an untrained eye. So upper left corner is mullein, top right is foxglove, lower right is comfrey, and left bottom is borage. So it's really important to wait till something flowers before you pick it. Foxglove, 1 leaf of that will kill you if you take that. If you put that in your smoothie, if you eat it in any way, shape, or form, and you just don't want to make that mistake. So there's a lot of plants that do look alike. There's a lot of ways of learning about them so that you don't make a mistake. Once you do learn the plants, once you study them and you're absolutely certain you've planted it in your yard, then you're free to forage. And you know, these weeds have been used for centuries. And like I said, the weed is a plant whose virtues have long since been forgotten. So I'm hoping that this Zoom and subsequent Zooms will help reawaken an interest and your passion for developing a relationship with these plants. Allowing them to be is good for the ecosystem. It's a way of living with reciprocity. And I encourage you to learn more about them, and they will feed and nourish you, and giving back to them will feed and nourish all of the others with whom we share the plant. So I have ended at 45 minutes. I have 15 minutes for questions. I want to, these are, before I forget, this is Rosemary Gladstar, a friend and the matron of the herbal movement globally. So she has Sage Mountain, great contact for information. Christopher Hobbs is, 4th generation internationally renowned herbalist and research scientist from UC Berkeley. Wealth of knowledge. He also has a whole COVID-19 series at botanicwise.com. And it's well worth listening to. Chestnut School of Herbal Medicine is where I studied and got my certificate. They will grill you in botany. They will grill you in poisonous plants, so you know what you're doing. And it's a great, great resource and great coursework. This is Wild Remedies is another resource for you. And these are plant books. So edible wild plants, they're foraging books and ID books. I love Peterson's field guides. I would also get the Peterson's Field Guide to Poisonous Plants. I think one of the failings of a lot of our herbal books is that they don't have the poisonous plants in them, so you know what they are, so you can be absolutely certain you're not picking one by mistake. If you're picking goldenrod, goldenrod is a very strong decongestant, but there's ragworts that look like that. And some things won't poison you right away. A ragwort will damage your liver, by the time you figure out what happened, it's too late because there's too much damage already. Other plants like poison hemlock, water hemlock, and foxglove will kill you in a very short order, but they can be confused with some of these other plants. So it's really important to know what they are. Okay. Nutritional value of wild plants, John Callis. If you want to know the nutritional value compared to the grocery store. And again, a weed is a plant whose virtues have long since been forgotten, and I do hope you find time to learn them. This is my contact information. Earth Visions Consulting will have the Zoom links on them for future Zooms about wild plant walks. Botanical Energetics is my therapy practice where I help people with the flower essences. I've been doing that for 24 years. Practice is international, and I would be happy to talk with you about that as well, but there's plenty of information on my website. Feel free to contact me at either one of these sites if you have any questions about tonight or moving forward. And I think, Mark, are you going to copy these addresses into the chat for people so I can get out of the Zoom, out of the share?
Oh, you want me to copy these addresses? Well,
People
okay.
can get them. If you get the recording, you can get my information. Correct? You're going to post
Right.
this?
I was going to put your email address in the chat.
That's fine. That's
Okay.
fine. Yeah, and my email is also at the website. So what I want to do is
Your other email address that you gave me. Yeah.
the Earth Visions Consulting is the email address I want in the.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So Charlene at Earth Visions Consulting is the email for contacting me. My other email, I get too many millions of contacts. So I'm going to stop sharing now so we have time for questions. I can't see the chat as long as I'm sharing, so I'm going to get out of here.
The presentation will be again on the library's YouTube channel, either tomorrow or early next week. Okay. There are several questions that came up in the chat, Charlene.
Yep. Okay. Looking through here for the questions, I've got people. Do you know of any local places that are foraging friendly? I think Reservoir Park, if I'm not mistaken, is foraging friendly. There's no pesticides being used there. I wouldn't trust any community parks unless you talk to your township or borough about that. But this is one of, I think, an important initiative is to talk to your townships, your boroughs, and your counties, and make sure that there are safe foraging places for people who want to forage, and pick the plants. So that's a great question. The only one I know of is Reservoir Park in Phoenixville. It's not spray. It's public. Okay. Violets and lymph benefits. Yes, violets are a lymphagogue. They help lymph drainage. And you're welcome to contact me more about that. You can make a tea out of the leaves. Again, with violets, you want to be careful and not pick it unless you're absolutely certain, because there's other plants that are lookalikes that are toxic, like buttercup, and you don't want to pick a buttercup instead of a violet. So if you're harvesting it from the wild, you have to wait until it blooms. You have to be certain that it blooms before you pick it. But it is a very effective lymphagogue. Okay, where does stinging nettle grow? Generally in moist soil in the woods, and shade, stream banks. If you walk through it, you'll have no doubt. But there's wood nettle and there's stinging nettle. And wood nettle looks very similar to stinging nettle, and they're both edible, but stinging nettle has more of the medicinal properties. But you can eat both of them. So they both grow in moist soil. So do the nutritive qualities of nettle and things like lamb's quarters remain with drying? Well, nettle, when you cook nettle or when you dry nettle, you deactivate the trichomes. You never want to eat raw nettle. I was just at a conference with somebody who was picking nettle raw and eating it. You don't want to do that. That's not good for your kidneys. So drying it will maintain some of the nutrient value. You can dry the lamb's quarters. I generally, no, lamb's quarters I eat fresh. I would eat lamb's quarters fresh. Nettles I dry to make tea out of, but for the antihistamine value, I like the nettle fresh. How many chemical-free years should you wait to harvest from a yard that used chemicals? 3 years is the standard answer. You can put amendments on that can help break down the chemicals, but 3 years is generally what is considered a safe time period. Is there an easy way to add some of these plants into your yard if your yard doesn't have them already? Sure, just go get them and plant them. You can just get them from somebody else who does and start planting them, and they'll take hold. They are, some people call them invasive, but they will generally take hold, and you can start different patches. But just make sure where you plant the nettle patch, though. Nobody's playing in it. You want to do a face plant in the nettle patch. Is there a place where we can buy these plants? I mean, you can get yarrow at a landscape nursery. Bee balm, Monard, I didn't talk about that, but most of these plants are feral there. They come up for free in the wild. Find a friend who doesn't spray their yard and dig up a few and bring them over to your place. Okay, will you also please share this PowerPoint present? Yes, the PowerPoint will be shared. One can copy and paste. Okay, where can we get more information about the Phoenixville foraging group? You mentioned at the start, Phoenixville area transition. You can email me and I can send that to you. Jane, do you want to share? Can you unmute and share where, contact for the Phoenixville transition and the Living Landscapes work group?
Yeah, Phoenixville area transition has a website, pat.community, and community, the whole word is the domain name. I put it right at the beginning of the chat, and I'll put it in again. And the Living Landscapes work group of that has their meeting next Friday, and Charlene is going to show us how to make tea bags. And so you can wander through the website to find the Living Landscapes, or how can I put, it's a Zoom meeting. So I guess how about if I put my email here, and if you'd like to come and learn how to make the tea bags, just email me, which is what people are doing to sort of register for the workshop next Friday night.
Thanks, Jane.
Yeah.
There are many other common weeds to these that are beneficial, and they will be part of the Zooms. There's daylily, there's purslane, there's plantain, there's burdock, there's yellow dot. There's a lot of weeds that are in our repertoire. So, and I'll be posting the Zooms on my website, Earth Visions Consulting, so you can pick and choose which ones you might want to learn about, but I'll have one Zoom per plant. So I need to give them due time. So it's about an hour per Zoom. Is it okay to use organic lawn care company? That's a loaded question. It depends on what they're using. Certainly organic is better than inorganic, but anytime you're putting an amendment on the soil, you're changing the characteristics of it. You're changing the microbial ecosystem. So it depends on what exactly they are calling organic. There's so many different things out there that call organic lawn care. So it's hard to answer that question without knowing the details. Okay, so recipes. Yeah, recipes are in the Zoom, and there will be more recipes with more Zooms. So again, the other Zooms are going to be out in the landscape, plant ID, plant habitat, growth patterns, and then come into my kitchen and we'll make some meals and medicines. And hopefully this will become part of your repertoire too. And we can expand this into our communities, and our communities can support chemical-free landscaping and foraging as well. So everybody is served, and everyone matters in the community, including the soil microbes. Okay, so thank you very much for your time. Thank you for inviting me. It's been an honor and pleasure, and I look forward to hearing more from all of you.
Thank you, Charlene.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it tonight. And we invite you all back for our next program in the Community Gardening Around the Village series, which is Thursday, March 25th at 7 p.m. The title of that presentation is Backyard Gardening for the Complete Beginner, and that will feature Martha Cownap, the lead herb gardener at Camp Hill, Camerton Hills. Again, Thursday, March 25th at 7. You can go to Phoenixville Public Library website and the events calendar there to register for that, www.phoenixvillelibrary.org. Thanks everyone for logging in tonight, and take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for
Bye.
coming.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thanks for coming, Mark.
Thank you so much. Fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.